Ross Gay is the New York Times bestselling author, we love Ross Gay, of the essay collections The Book of Delights and Inciting Joy, and 4 books of poetry. His catalog of unabashed gratitude won the National Book Critics Circle Award and the Kingsley Tufts Poetry Award, and was a finalist for the National Book Award. His book, Be Holding, won the 2021 PEN America Gene Stein Book Award. His latest book of essays, In Your Hot Little Hands, is The Book of More Delights. It's absolutely fabulous. Ross is a founding board member of the Bloomington Community Orchard, a nonprofit free fruit for all food justice and joy project. We love that. He's also the Ruth Lilly Professor of English at Indiana University. He will be joined on stage by Adrian Matejka, who is now our new best friend. He is an award-winning poet himself as well, and editor of Poetry Magazine. His most recent collection of poems, Somebody Else Sold the World, was a finalist for the 2022 University of North Texas Rilke Prize and the 2022 Indiana Authors Award. His first graphic novel, Last on His Feet, Jack Johnson and the Battle of the Century, was published in 2023. Adrian has received fellowships from a whole slew of people, including the Academy of American Poets, the Guggenheim Foundation, the Lannan Foundation, the National Endowment for the Arts, the Rockefeller Foundation, and a Simon Fellowship from the United States Artists. He served as Poet Laureate of the state of Indiana in 2018-19. Let's give a big fan welcome to Ross Gay and Adrian Matejka.
All right, so first of all, I'm so pleased to be here with Ross to celebrate his new book, and with all of you here in Evanston. So this is it's a real joy to get to talk about the work. We were talking backstage trying to figure it out because we've been friends for 20-something years, and where you start a conversation like that. And this project has been, sort of percolating for about that same amount of time.
Yeah.
So we thought the best way maybe to introduce it to you is to have Ross read some first, and then we'll jump into it after that.
Okay. So good to be here with old friends, people I haven't seen for a long time, and new friends, and Adrian, who long time, old friends, but also haven't seen for a little while. So anyway, it feels good. Thanks for coming. I'm going to read you 4 essays, I think, and then we'll have a little talk, and then if there's time for more, we'll read a little more. This one is called My Birthday Again. It's the first essay in the book. And if you know the first Book of Delights, for those of you who don't know, it's one day I was having a nice day, and I was like, oh, this is delightful. And I thought, I was in a moment of delight, and I noticed it. And I thought, oh, let me write a little essay about this. And then I thought, well, let me write an essay every day for a year. I didn't think it. It was thought for me. It slammed into my head, Let me write a little essay every day for a year about something that delights me. That was the first book. And this is the kind of second version of it. And the first book, I say my birthday, and then I close it with my birthday. I start and end on my birthday. And this one says, my birthday again. Well, here we are again. This time, my 47th birthday. This year, we decided to enjoy a week away up in a little rented cabin in Vermont, which has a bounty of delights. The first of which is that apple trees grow everywhere here. Yards, roadside thickets, parking lots, and this year they are loaded. I have never seen such forageable bounty quite like this, and it makes me want to come back with a pickup truck to snag a few years' worth of applesauce. As we were driving around, admiring all the apple trees, I was also admiring that very Vermonty and Catholic-sounding roadside feature called the pullout. Also called pull-offs. They are common here as air. Room enough for a few cars to pull over and look down at the beautiful river roiling through the boulders below, or overlook the valley with the first embers of fall in the leaves. Shortly after we pulled out of a pull-off, we pulled into yet another of the delights of Vermont, a roadside farm stand. This one peopled by people, though sometimes they're peopled solely by a box in which to slide your money. A trust box, I've never heard it called, though we should. As we were getting some blueberries and raspberries, we overheard some Vermonters who were happily whooped from summiting a pass earlier today. They described it while picking out their fruit. Beautiful this and beautiful that. Challenging, but fun. So we got directions from them, and after we settled up, we headed there. The trail started right at the edge of the parking lot, which was more like a pull-off. and we entered what was immediately a lush and magical forest. Birches with their bark curling like pages of old books, ferns luminous from the light dappling through the canopy, plush carpets of moss, nearly fluorescent mushrooms. It was ruggedish, lots of scrambling up slick slabs of, I think, granite. We were both sweating pretty good within the first half hour or so, and Stephanie stashed her sweatshirt behind a fallen tree. We passed through what felt like several ecosystems, and when, about 2 hours later, we finally approached a sign that we knew in our heart of hearts was going to tell us 100 feet, maybe 50 to the summit, it said 1 mile to go. We'd only eaten a couple handfuls of berries. I'd only brought a not all the way full quart glass jar of water for both of us, and as we were contemplating reaching the top, a couple hikers approached the same sign we were looking at. They both had on big packs. One looked to be about mid-60s, the other late 20s or early 30s. We learned they worked together and were practicing for a longer trip on the Appalachian Trail, with which this trail intersected. The older of the two was the boss. She had hiking poles, and the younger looked a little bit coerced. The boss asked us which way we were going, and we told her that we were deciding whether or not to go the final mile, pointing in the direction of the summit. Upon which she looked us up and down, noting, I guess, our attire, t-shirts and shorts, and asked us, or maybe actually she was telling us, you know cotton's a killer, right? Then pointing to our feet, unsupportive sneakers, though thank you for complimenting them, she made an, are you kidding me face, and shook her head no. Then she asked how much water we had, and I shook the half-full quart glass jar, cutely, I thought, at which she sneered, that's not even close to enough, making an, are you stupid face, and no glass on the trail. I was already backing away, trying to sneak down the trail for who wants to get chewed out on their birthday, when Stephanie, for some reason, blabbed about, yeah, I am a little hungry, and yeah, I do have a little bit of a headache, and yeah, my knee's kind of bothering me too, blah, blah, blah. At which I recoiled and ducked my head like, why would you tell her that? Like, she's gonna yell at me, which in a Vermonter way she did. In full-on, take your head out of your ass ease, she actually asked, what's wrong with you? After we told her, everything is wrong with us, you're right, thank you so much, and no more glass on the trail, sorry about that, ma'am, she said, sort of chipper again, okay, take care now, enjoy Vermont. As we were descending, we could hear her talking shit about us to the ranger a few yards farther up the trail. She was hungry. He had a glass jar. They were wearing cotton. Trotting down, enjoying myself, trying not to smoke Stephanie and her hurt knee and head, I found myself whistling and feeling the soft earth receiving my inadequate footwear, and the glowing ferns dragging their feathery fronds along my suicidal cotton shorts. And I noted how pleased I was, delighted even, as I tend often to be, at having not reached the summit, to have gotten close, but no cigar. An interesting quality I was turning over in my head on my glad descent. Maybe I'm afraid of failure. Maybe I'm afraid of the ends of things. Maybe it's a rejection of the conquering spirit of some of my forefathers. Maybe it's a distant cousin to the way I, for some reason, always leave out a tiny bit of a few ingredients when I'm cooking. A few slices of onion, a couple small potatoes, 3 florets of broccoli or cauliflower. Maybe it's a small and weird gesture of hope, leaving something in the tank for tomorrow, which implies there will be a tomorrow. Maybe not finishing is a prayer for the tomorrow. An interesting prayer to make on the first day of a year-long project, though it was a dueling prayer I made when Stephanie brought home 4 very delicious birthday tacos for me, which, along with the chips and guac and the kimchi and the roasted sweet potatoes and the kombucha, I did in fact summit. Thank you. This one's called, All Right, Baby! Exclamation point. That's why I said it like that. My friend Bernardo and I went to the courts yesterday. Bernardo says what's up. And as we were running through our warm-up, about 100 mid-range jumpers, a couple young guys came over and asked us to play, challenged us, it felt like, sort of lingering nearby, glaring at us a little derisively, it seemed, for the very act of warming up. Look at these dorks. And when we finished warming up, oh fine, we were limbering up, and checked the ball in, we promptly kicked the shit out of them. My bad, we got more buckets than they did. These kids were in their early 20s, babies, though the baby who was guarding me, a wiry little guard in a snuggly of tattoos with a nice crossover and awful jump shot and reluctance to smile, was doing his damnedest to prove he was no baby. He was shoving me and elbowing me and wrapping me up and hacking me, all of which I was admiring to myself and out loud. But when I blew a chippy jump hook and got my own rebound and was putting it back, he shoved me hard square in the chest, and being airborne, I fell inelegantly on my ass, though I kept my eyes on the shot, which, damn, I missed. When I was still on the ground, Bernardo and I made the briefest eyes at each other that held the entire history of mankind, by which I mean mankind. The beginning, middle, and end of every war ever made, but I almost immediately jumped up and applauded this kid for a good hard foul. And I even sort of hugged him, just this side of consensually, which he warily accepted, barking as I was a slurry of coachly affirmations. Good stuff, well done, all right, baby, that's what I'm talking about. Which, in retrospect, were probably directed at me as much as my assailant. By which I mean it was not too long ago that if this baby, or any baby, hacked me like that so openly and notoriously, I would have thrown at least one punch in the direction of this baby's head. More accurately, it would have been my body, my youthfully testicled body, my youthful testicles doing the throwing themselves toward this kid's head, which, you know, things can escalate. Testicled things, testicles, can really go wrong. But not today, for not only did my testicles feel no urge to throw themselves at this kid, which, and this time it's actually true, would have hurt me more than would have him, I felt myself feel nothing like rage or embarrassment or hurt or, God forbid, disrespect, the scrotum's bread and butter. Better yet, and it seems to me this ought to be the scrotum's bread and butter, I felt love for this little tough guy. And I felt myself feeling love for this little tough guy. So much love, I'm pretty sure it was also for my own little tough guy, getting less tough and littler by the day. Thank you. Thank you. Sometimes when I read these things, this is a brand new book, came out like 10 days ago. Thank you. I'm reading them and I'm like, how did I get to that? Like this one. This is called Hickeys, ostentatiously blandished. It's a good title. Though there is something so weird to me about the way that children these days unabashedly flaunt their hickeys like they're jewelry or something, how they almost wear them like a fleeting public emblem, a bruisey ring, I guess, of having been hoovered for a night or afternoon or something. That doesn't mean I don't like it. I mean, I like it on their behalf. I like it for them. I like that these kids have apparently kicked the hickey shame. I know shame is like water and just looks for a place to settle, but still, sometimes it's nice even to celebrate when shame moves someplace else. I remember the ends to which so many of my generation went trying to conceal their welts, comb, ice, etc. The ends to which I concealed any possibility of being a desirous creature from my parents or any of the adults in my midst, etc. Oh, I just remembered this. If a woman ballpark my mother's age was working the counter of CVS when I was getting my condoms, I'd bail. Or sometimes I'd just steal them. The miserable internal chatter that goes along with that shame, the beliefs, the wreckage. Not these kids, not hickey shame anyway. As I was drinking a coffee on the porch of the cafe and watched a few of their bruised ilk go unself-consciously by, I breathed an actual sigh of relief. How nice, I thought. When I was but a young professor of poetry, an assistant as it's called on the inside, which means on 6 years probation, a 6-year tryout, 6 years pretending you agree with everyone and doing any and everything asked of you. A student once came to my office with so many goddamn hickeys on his neck. I mean, it was hickeys on top of hickeys. It was so many hickeys, they made a kind of Joan Mitchell painting of his throat. A purple swarm of untentacled jellyfish wrapping about his pale neck, slurping from the neck of his t-shirt up to about the fine hairs of his chin. These adamant hickeys, which one might in a corny way say were like a map of desire, were like a map of how this kid had almost been eaten, looked to me. I worked as hard as I ever have not to let my eyes drift down from his eyes to his collar. Where he looked around the neck like an albino leopard or something. Dude was so bruised up, and because it was a full 15 years before these new, heroic, shameless hickey hussies, his being unconcealed made me think, maybe this is a plea for help. Maybe I am supposed to liberate this kid from some suction dungeon. While answering to the best of my ability his questions about line breaks and Theodore Retke and why we were watching Richard Pryor videos in a poetry class. But given as I was still on probation and inclined to keep my job, in addition to always keeping my door open and other such ancillary self-policings, I went the extra mile in adhering to all of the possible prohibitions, ultimately on closeness, on taking care, because there's an office for that, and it's not this one. Put it on your syllabus, that's not your job. And I understand how closeness easily teeters or spills into abuse, especially where power is unequally distributed, where the hierarchical power structure is the bedrock of the system, or rather, it is the system. And the first and almost sole lesson of school is the preservation of that hierarchical power structure. But isn't it interesting, sad, isn't it sad, that rather than troubling or even eliminating the power structure and thereby the inevitable, the requisite abuse of power, we excise the closeness or the possibility of such. We preserve the power at the expense of closeness, keeping always our distance, for which, in this instance anyway, thank God, because it kept me from blurting out what I was thinking, though I kind of knew the answer ballpark too. Dude, what happened to your neck? And I'll just read this last one and then we can get into it. This is called Imposter Syndrome. I was talking with a friend today who, like me, teaches college and who, like me, isn't white, and so ends up advising, as we do, because of the dearth of us as much as how awesome we are, many of the black and non-white students in our programs. Eventually, we got talking about that condition familiar to all our advisees and ourselves, familiar indeed to almost everyone in the realm of academia or the academia-adjacent world, imposter syndrome. It is a condition much fretted about. There are workshops and symposia, I assure you. There are paid consultants to help you with it. Soon there will be a certificate, if not a degree, in its alleviation, I assure you. The syndrome with which I too have been afflicted, one time calling my friend Joanna because I was so convinced I had no idea how to teach a class on Uncle Tom's Cabin, which I put on the goddamn syllabus, that I needed her to talk me through or off the ledge. One time introducing a fellow non-white writer to my mostly white department like I was suddenly possessed by the wind or something, my voice quaking, a few hundred other times, emerges, so the workshops will tell you, I'm saving you money and time here, from a feeling of inadequacy often experienced by certain people, often non-white people, first generation or working class types. These categories often overlap, as you know. We feel like we don't belong because we don't. And so to prove we do, we are often the ones jotting most quickly at the meetings, writing words like heuristic and impanel. And we are very careful not to break anything, and whose hands, if we are not actively eating with so many spoons and forks at the faculty dinner, are in our laps. The people not so afflicted, you can see them a mile away. And if they do not come from money, which they mostly do, they come from PhDs or PhD adjacents, my anecdotal research tells me. It's also possible a very few of them dip their bucket into a well of okayness I have not yet located. They really stretch out like they own the place, because they kind of do. About these people, by these people, such things are said as, he just looks like he should be a full professor, regardless that he hasn't written a book in a decade or two. Much the way some people think Gavin Newsom just looks like a president. Anyhow, as we were talking, it occurred to me that the syndrome is a symptom of wanting to be taken seriously by the people who run the joint. Or another way of putting it, of wanting to belong. Who wants to be an interloper? Or a better way of saying it still, who wants to be perceived as an interloper? As we unlock the door to our offices, or as we walk to the front of our classes, or as we introduce this or that fancy speaker, or introduce ourselves to this or that fancy person, we do not want someone to wonder, or God forbid actually ask, what are we doing here? It's worth noting that niggling inside this imposterism is the knowledge that some people say things about black, college teachers like, oh, they were an affirmative action hire, etc. It's a way of saying, we all know you weren't hired because of the quality of your work, and by extension, you were only hired because you're black, etc. And by extension, you don't belong here. The implication is that they, however, were hired for the quality of their work, as used to happen in the good old days when merit existed, and not because they went to the same schools and knew the same people and had the same advisors and talked just like and ate the same foods as and summered in the same places as the people hiring them. In other words, as though they weren't affirmative action hires. Look, I'm all ears if you think you have a good argument for merit, but this sure as hell ain't one. In other words, and here's where I'm going to earn my money, this is also the long-coming, my bad, delight. For those of you, us, suffering from imposterism, what happens when, aside from keeping our jobs and insurance, we reflect a little on the institution we are pining to be accepted by, of which pining, remember, the imposterism is evidence, and realize that while we may enjoy teaching and writing and the big inexpensive gym and the libraries and all the serviceberry bushes on campus and the light on the limestone walls in the late afternoon and all the pudgy squirrels and the co-eds studiously feeding those squirrels from their own lunches, that may be most of all. We may not, some of us anyway, be that interested in belonging to the institution. We may love school, for instance, as I now do. Ms. Cameron, my wonderful 11th grade English teacher, in whose class I was a bona fide jag-off numbskull, will be startled and, I bet, glad to hear. And we may love that it pays the bills, but we may not be that into the corporation it has become. Like, really. Not to mention those jackets with the decorative elbow patches. A sartorial effect matched in dismalness only by the truly petite pockets of some women's clothing. Maybe a few other things, fine. Which unbelonging requires some discipline, some practice. Because, and this is purely conjectural, speculative, I think imposterism is often co-diagnosed with optimistic diversity thought. The belief, hope, that if we apply a little elbow grease and keep a good attitude, our very presence in the institution will transform that institution. Changing it from the inside, we say, throwing cute little uppercuts through the air. And as tribute to such belief, we have pinned to the bulletin boards in our imaginations the photograph of the little black child touching the first black president's hair, identifying and plucking our heartstrings as he does so. The texture of the president's hair is like his, and therefore, we all get it, he too might be president. And because heartstrings are often used as garrotes, we forget that the door that's been kicked open for that child and other children like him, or ceiling smashed or summit climbed or whatever, is to a job whose description, in addition to the ceremonial stuff and pictures, is to disproportionately withhold the means of life, whether that means letting the water stay poisoned, drone bombing civilians, cooing and starving, sanctioning, uncooperative regimes, etc., from people the complexion, ballpark, of that child. In other words, sometimes belonging means we too now might push the terrible buttons. If that's the summit, Lord, that we might all be imposters.
Ross Gay. Okay. So as Ross was describing the campus in that last piece, we both taught at Indiana University together for a long time, and we're singing in those very hallways. So I was thinking a little bit about the ways that our art can become the thing that enacts like the resistance to and the recognition of those things. You wrote a book right before this, Inciting Joy, that gets into some of those things too.
Yeah.
And then before that, the original Book of Delights.
Yep.
So maybe we could start by talking a little bit about what brought you back to the Delights and what you have learned from that.
Yeah, totally. One thing is that I decided to write this book, another Book of Delights, because as I say in the introduction, I say my buddy Patrick Rosal, beautiful poet, we were together at a residency in Texas when I finished writing the first one, and he did ask, he said, you think you're gonna keep writing them? And I had thought of it, and I kind of thought of because I do love massive, long, ongoing projects. I was sort of thinking when I was younger, I studied painting very hard, and I love Robert Motherwell's Elegy to the Spanish Republic paintings, several versions of a painting, or I love that mode, or poets who write poems that go on and on and on. I just love that as a mode or a practice or an inquiry or something. So I thought about, what would it mean if I just wrote this forever, but I didn't want to write it forever. I had other stuff to do. So I thought, well, maybe every 5 years would be interesting, because time would pass. I could kind of my relationship to even the question of delight would surely change. And you're right, in the middle, I wrote a book called Inciting Joy, which is I think 13 or 14 essays, and they're, the longest one is 60 pages or so. Mm-hmm. So they're very different, and they have the footnotes in that book, most of the footnotes are longer than most of these essays. Which may or may not recommend the book, I'm not sure. If you're me, it recommends it. I had a buddy who's a real good friend of mine. He reads my work, but he's not a school guy. He was traumatized by school. It's not deep. But he didn't like school. He got thrown out, that kind of thing. And I had him read that essay, and he was giving me comments, and I was like, yo, did you read the footnotes? And he was like, fuck no, I don't read footnotes. Anyway, so coming back to the book, one of the things that I learned in the course of writing the first book of essays is how to write a short essay. Even if I didn't actually write them every day, the rules, I give myself rules, write them every day, write them by hand, write them quickly, 30 minutes or less for draft. Even if I didn't actually, that first book, maybe I wrote 280 of them. That's a lot of essays. That's a lot of practice. So, and then to write the book of essays in between it, which is a lot more practice, and then to come back to this, one of the things that's interesting is trying to come back to the question of delight, 5 years older, all of those questions, but as a better writer, how do you not get too good? Because there's a way that when you get good, you get uninteresting. If your thinking is very good and very polished, you know how to nail an essay. it's sort of like, that's, to me, that's the death of your essays. That's the death of your thinking, actually. Yeah.
It's not like shooting jumpers, right?
Yeah,
Because each
yeah,
time
that's right.
that's different.
Yeah, it's different than shooting jumpers, very much.
So how does basketball fit in then? Because you wrote about it. What's up, Bernardo, if you're watching? And I'm thinking about all of these things as part of your practice of being in the world, right?
Yeah.
Like you play ball all the time, you
Yeah.
write all the time. They build into a particular kind of life that allows you to see the world in the way that you need to. So where does basketball? I have another question like this too in a second. So where is basketball in this practice, and what do you take from that to this?
Well, I mean, I love to practice.
No,
I
Allen
love to
Iverson.
practice. Yeah. You know, I feel like it's a little bit, you know, like I'm a person who, if you're my friend and you will play basketball with me, you're gonna be doing drills. And my brother, you know, like I love my brother. He's not like a basketball guy, but he likes to play basketball. And every once in a while we'll get together and we'll just be like chucking the ball at the fucking rim. And I'll be like, yo, let's do some stuff. Let's like work out. And we'll do it for like 5 minutes. And he's like, all right, I'm good, man. I'm not doing this. And I get it. But I love to do drills. I love to practice. I love to, you know, I'm embarrassed to say, but I like watch, you know, like drills. I'm like, oh yeah, it looks like a nice drill. I'm gonna do that drill. I'm not getting paid for this. I'm not going anywhere for it, you know. I just like, it just feels good to know how to do something with my left hand, you know. But I feel like that sense of like practice, like doing a thing for repetition, is very much something that I feel like I've learned other places too, but in my sort of life as a ball player, but like an athlete growing up and stuff. But the other thing in like that, you know, that book Beholding, which is about that move of Dr. J's in the 1980 NBA Finals, there is something that you learn, like if you watch Kyrie work, you learn that there is a kind of genius at play here. I mean, it feels like quantum physics to me, like sometimes, because I like to study him, and I like to watch the things that he's doing. So you can watch, for those of you who want to know, you can go on YouTube, you know, and you can watch like these people work out, do their open gyms, where it's like, to me, it's better basketball to watch than like with the referees and stuff. It's just them playing. And you get to see guys working on their stuff, people working on their stuff. And some of the stuff that he's doing in the gym, just like he does on the court, but you see where he's working it out. I'm just like, he's learning a kind of improvisatory, imaginative, something, you know. He's improvising, he's using his imagination, he's testing things, he's seeing what he can and cannot do. And I feel like that is something you also, if you're kind of playing around with your body like that, you're seeing, oh, my body can't do that, but in the attempt of doing that, it does this other thing I didn't know it could do, you know. And I feel like writing is a lot like that, you know. That's my hope, you know, and my hope is always to be doing something that I don't know how to do. That's my hope as a writer, you know.
Yeah. If you do it every day in the way that you've been doing with this project, you can see the progress too. Yeah. You know, when you were talking about Kyrie Irving, I was thinking about you. He's a genius on the court, and he has a particular kind of intellect there, and then there's another version of him doing flat Earth gang kind of things, which is. I'm
with him, man. No, I think he's a genius all the way. Yeah, man, I love Kyrie.
Yeah,
I love Kyrie.
That's your guy.
I love him. I love him. Yep.
See, because you also love practice, and most of us
I love practice.
Yeah, most of us don't.
Yeah.
But you see the results of it too.
Hell yeah.
Right. So we had this summer right before COVID where we played basketball a lot of days. And you could see the practice and the way it was changing. And it didn't help my writing at all, but he was writing the coolest poem at the same time. And I was like, so this is actually, I'm sorry, I'm using this as an opportunity for me to figure out where I went wrong that summer because you came back with a whole scene.
Adrian, you showed me how to shoot better. Adrian gave me a couple tips, and I was a little bit like, oh man, leave me alone. But then I was like, I kept doing it. I was like, because Adrian can actually shoot. I can't shoot. I just run a lot and I like push people around. But Adrian can shoot, and he showed me a couple things, and thank you.
Like I was never a player. I was a coach when I was like 15, right? Like that's like Ross was a real player. But so something that I was hearing differently from when I read the book and when we were experiencing it together is just how genuinely funny the poems are or the pieces are, because I know you as a really funny person who enjoys laughing, but as I was hearing you read the pieces, I was like, wait a minute. This is reminding me of Richard Pryor. And then I remember the piece where you talk about Richard Pryor. So I guess I'm asking a lot about influence right now, but I'm interested in what you learned from Richard Pryor that you brought to this.
Yeah. I mean, Richard Pryor, there's so many things, but there's, in my last book, I write about the last 10 or 15 minutes of Live on the Sunset Strip, where he sort of tells the story of having burned himself up, smoking freebase. To me, it's like among the best bits of performance I've ever seen. And it's just, and that's not the only thing. I mean, but I feel like one of the things that he does, obviously his timing is impeccable, But there's also this thing that he does is he has this kind of like, what we call in poetry a volta. He can like have a turn in a sonnet, like usually a 14-line poem, the 12th line, poof, you turn it. It's kind of rhetorical change, and maybe you ask a question or you like shift the poem. And Richard Pryor has these voltas where you think you're going somewhere, and he like, I mean, it's like violent. I mean, it's really like, I think in that essay I say, oh, this is what Dickinson's talking about when she says something will cut it cuts the top of your head off. That's how you know it's poetry, And he does that in a lot of his stuff. So I do feel like that turn, that kind of like the ability or the desire or the curiosity about going in a certain direction, and then what happens if we do yank it into another direction. Like that last essay that I read, I think you could probably see in some ways like, oh, we're going down this one kind of path. And then, and it's not like just like a sort of just playful, but it's kind of like wandering around, but then it gets yanked into this other place. I feel like many people, but I feel like Richard Pryor is definitely a guide at that, yeah. I mean, I think there's also so many things about like sort of vulnerability and exposure and complicated, difficult emotions and facts about human beings that he's willing to sort of witness for us,
Yeah, and embody in a way that is vulnerability is such a big part of it.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think other people might use humor as a shield in a particular way, but in some instances, and also in the book, humor becomes a thing that allows you to get to the epiphany of the piece, and that feels very Richard Pryor-like. There should be a name for it. Maybe it's a Richard Pryor.
Yeah, it's a Richard Pryor. Yeah, totally. Yeah, when I think of my literary guides, he's as important as anyone. Absolutely.
Who else? I know you mentioned Maggie Smith. Who else? Or Maggie Nelson.
Yeah, Maggie Nelson. I mean, Melville. I think of Herman Melville. I love, like, that book, Benito Sereno. I think of it as being very much in line, actually, with Richard Pryor stuff. Toni Morrison, Jamaica Kincaid, Amiri Baraka, Lucille Clifton, Audre Lorde, Gerald Stern, the poet Gerald Stern, who died just about a year ago today, just about. Man, I can't imagine my work without my poems, without Jerry's poems, but I also can't imagine a thing, and I love to say it, is that Jerry has a book called Stealing History, and it's all short essays in a kind of daily manner. It's not every day, but they're kind of diaristic. And about 4 years after that book came out, I came to Jerry, and he was living in assisted living at this point, and I was like, oh yeah, Jerry, I'm working on these short kind of diaristic poems. They're kind of like daily. And then later I was like, oh, that's exactly what Jerry was doing. He's my teacher in such a deep way that the things that I sort of was like, I got this thing. 5 years later, I'd be like, oh yeah, that's what Jerry was doing, which is so moving to me. I love that. I love that we aren't without each other,
Yeah. Well, there's a whole community that's contributing to this that you're filtering through too. So I remember, like the Argonauts was one of the
that shows up a couple times.
Yeah. who else has been inspiring you as you've been writing? Because if you're looking for a delight every day, I'm imagining that we read it, you're pulling from all kinds of places. But I'm really interested in that. If you could
There's a book, I think his name is Brian Dillon, called Suppose a Sentence, I think it's called. And it's just like he looks at sentences, his favorite sentences. It's just like beautiful. It's beautiful.
So it's just a book about sentences.
It's a book about sentences that he loves. So dorky. And I was all over it. I was all over it. I have a list of a reading list. The books I was reading when I was Ama Kojo's book, Bluest Poems, Bluest Nude. Hilton All's work. I read that little book, My Pen Up, about Prince, but his first essay in the book White Girls is just, the writer Glenn Ford, Eduardo Galeano, very important. He also writes short essays, some very short essays. There's a writer named Samantha Hunt who has a book called The Unwritten Book that is just astonishing to me. On and on. Rebecca Solnit, she kind of shows up in my work a lot.
I'm glad that you included that.
Oh, cool.
Because lineage is really important, I think, to following the fullness of a project. Like when you see a work that's being done, and I love to know who else is like sort of tattooed on that sleeve.
Yeah, me too.
So I wish people would do that more often.
I know, it's fun. It's fun to do it because it sort of like tries to, we do have this thing about like kind of originality. And it's so silly. It's so silly. It's like immature, there's something immature about not being able to be like, oh yeah, I learned that from so-and-so. Not only immature, it's lonely. Like how lovely is it that like, people give us recipes and teach us how to sew and like what flower, by the way, beautiful flowers, God. But like, what to grow, preserve seeds for us, these things. Seems important to me.
Yeah, make mixtapes for you.
Mixtape for you, yeah, totally. Totally.
We had this time, and I don't, because I want to ask about your poems and how that's building in. But we had this moment when Catalog of Unabashed Gratitude came out, and our program at IU, where all of a sudden all the grad students started putting yes friends and direct addresses like that. If you've not read Catalog of Unabashed Gratitude, it is a phenomenal book, and it's worth reading part of every day as part of your practice.
But it annoyed you.
As a teacher, as a reader, I loved it. But I came back and all the students are like, yes, friends. And like, what you're
That's
taking.
what he hears my poems is like, yes, friends.
With, like holding up
a fruit, like an apple.
but this idea that you can just take a thing and drop it in someplace, and that's showing mastery, and it's also showing your loyalty or your interest in it. And so what I tried to work on them with was not getting rid of that or their enthusiasm for trying to write like Ross writes, but rather say, it took Ross 3 books to get here and a lot of other poems, so maybe write all of those and then try to figure out how to be like a direct addresser, because he had to really learn, he had to earn that thing, and it's like, and I want you to take it, but I want you to take it after, you know what I mean? And
and at the same time, isn't it lovely, like the way that we do that as young people? We're like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna let me sing like Al Green.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, you're imitating Al Green right now.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Like the hubris of that, right? But also the wonder.
The wonder and the beauty of it too. Yeah, like sometimes I'll hear people like, oh damn, like it's obvious you are reading so-and-so. And it's so sweet to me. And like, working through, incorporating the work into their own work. Yeah, I love it.
Yeah,
but
we shared a teacher, Yusef Kamanyaka, and that was my version of
totally.
I was taking everything from Yusef, talking about the hoodoo and talking about ghosts.
Yeah.
I grew up in Indianapolis, like none of this was part of it. but the idea, like it was so alluring to sound like that. I get it. But
totally.
I guess what I hope that I hope that they've learned at this point though is how much you enjoy sharing all the rest of it too.
Right.
So can we talk about your poems a little bit? Because I know we're going to have some time to
Yeah.
Okay. So One of the things that I loved about the first book of Delights is that was the first time I'd seen you really, dive into to prose.
Yeah.
And some of them sound like poems to me.
Yeah,
a lot
yeah.
of them have this great sonic quality. And this too, in inciting joy as well, even as you're making these arguments.
Yeah.
And I'm really interested and curious about how those things are feeding each other.
Yeah.
Because I know you're still writing poems. So
Yeah.
how do those two things operate in your life now?
Yeah, I don't even know how to answer that very well. Like, I can think in some ways of like what maybe I've brought from the poems, because I mostly have written poems in my life, what I brought from the poems into the essays. And I feel like that's an attention to music. I feel like that's a relationship to syntax, that I learned from writing poems. I feel like it might be a kind of relationship to the image and stuff. I'm way more sort of, I'm way more seduced by the kind of, what you might call poemy-ish stuff of an essay than I think, a lot of other writers. Maybe the most important thing too, though, is that I don't know if this is the case at all, but I wonder if there's a kind of, I think as a writer of poems, I have learned and tried for a long time to follow a kind of thing that I do not know, And that's like, for a lot of people, they talk about hearing like a phrase or like a little bit of music, language, or something, and they kind of go and they follow it, I think you talk about that, you have that experience. But which is to say, to not be making arguments, to not be starting with a thesis, but to be actually sort of following something you do not know what it is, With poetry, it's always, the metaphor, the sensory metaphor is always listening. I'm trying to listen for something I don't know how to hear. Essays, it feels like that too. But there's some, like the unknowing that compels an essay often feels a little bit less unknown than the unknowing that compels a poem, So all the double negatives, But I think that's the case. Although I never actually want to write absent the unknown, Like I always want to have a question, And if I don't start with a question, it's going to be a boring essay to me, Always.
In some ways, it feels like the delight itself that inspires the pieces are the questions.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
When I read them, I feel like that's the answer. That's what's being answered.
Yeah, totally. And there's something that I'm trying to work out. There's something about the delights as being one of the pleasures I've had of writing about this, these things is a taxonomizing, like delight is this and joy is that and gratitude is this, which I'm shy about. But actually, Eve Ewing was like, I think you should do it. You should, you should actually try to taxonomize. Yeah. And I feel like one of the things that delight relies on is a kind of surprise, I think. I think delight, like unknowing, not knowing something, is a component of delight. Because if you know everything, you don't have the sort of, you don't get surprised by things. You don't get alerted to things. You don't get made anew by things. So there's that, that it requires a kind of unknowing and a belief. Another word for that is wonder, like a commitment to wonder. And in some way, I was just talking at Smith College and I was trying to articulate this to their first year students, that there's some relationship between delight and disobedience, or delight and authority, like there's something about the capacity. I wrote the phrase down, and the phrase is something like enthusiastic skepticism, where something like you're like you're aware that things are not as they seem. Necessarily. Maybe it's that, And as a consequence, when a bird lands on your friend's head, you're like, holy fuck. This is wild life, That like to sort of to be open to that, and as a consequence, I think it's also to have a kind of skepticism to like what people tell you is true, to be like, I wonder if that's true.
Yeah.
You know? And I try to think like I don't think I'm trying to like cudgel delight into a kind of anti-authoritarian thing because it's good for me. I think it's actually, I think it's actually, there's something to that. There's something to the kind of, you can tell I'm working out now. I'll work out more. The next time I'm here, it'll be even more eloquent than that.
I'm still thinking about the bird on the head.
Yeah.
But to be open to that.
Be open to that.
And I think we are all part of a culture that in some ways is resistant to that, right? Like you don't get love for being surprised and joyful about things. You're cool because you're not thrown off by a bird.
Oh yeah.
Instead of just enjoying that moment and thinking like, probably will never happen again.
Oh, totally, right. Yeah. Like if you look at political discourse or any of it, it's about knowledge. It's about knowing and a kind of unmovable knowing, It's why all sides are afraid of challenge. It's why all sides want to silence, It's not like one side. It's not like one group of people is like, don't read books. It's like across the board, people are terrified of information. And they will clamp it down in various ways, Sometimes they'll throw journalists in prison, under the prison.
Right.
The good guys. So anyway, yeah, man, delight.
It's powerful.
Yeah.
It's powerful. Well, that makes me think about, I was thinking about when you were reading about that part about Barack Obama, and I mean, he's an example of what we're talking about in that. Insofar as a part of the performance of him was to not be surprised or delighted by things, even though he's a huge fan of poetry. And so, like, you can't be a fan of poetry and not want to be surprised. It's just essential to it. And so, what was the last thing that surprised you?
I see in your jacket. I touched your jacket. I was like, ooh.
It's made out of recycled material.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah, that actually surprised me. Yeah.
Like I think it's ocean plastic.
Okay. Yeah. Great. That surprised me. That's great. So many things. I mean, seriously, these flowers are wild. How beautiful they are. Yeah. These are zinnias. Are these zinnias? Yeah. God damn. I am growing a lot of zinnias, but none of them look quite like this. They're beautiful.
Yeah. Like they love the spotlight more than us.
I know, they're doing good.
Yeah. They're meant for it.
Yeah.
That's really good. We want to start with.
Do you want to read one more piece?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
What are you going to read for us?
This is called. This is a short one. It's called "Throwing Children." It is some miracle, some delight when a kid who has a hard time becomes a kid who's having a good time, in no small part thanks to you throwing that kid in the air again and again on a mile-long walk home from the Indian joint as her mom looks sideways at you like, you don't need to keep doing that because you're pouring with sweat and breathing a little bit now. You're getting a good workout. But even though it's sometimes very hard for you to believe, you say, I'm good. Because the kid laughs like a horse up there, laughs like a kangaroo, beating her wings against the light because she laughs like a happy little kid. And when coming down and grabbing your forearm to brace herself for the time when you will drop her, which you don't, and slides her hand into yours as she says for the 40th time, the 50th time, inexhaustible her delight, again and again. And you say, give me till the redbud tree or give me till the persimmon tree because she knows the trees. And so quiet you almost can't hear through her giggles. She says, okay. Till the next tree when she explodes howling, yanking your arm from the socket, again, all the wolves and mourning doves flying from her tiny throat, and you throw her so high she lives up there in the tree for a minute. She notices the ants organizing on the bark and a bumblebee carousing the little unripe persimmon in its beret. She laughs and laughs as she hovers up there like a bumblebee, like a hummingbird up there giggling in the light, like a giddy little girl up there the world knows how to love.